The photo on screen was taken on June 5th, 1999, by Jeff Whitner of the Associated Press. Whitner was currently in Beijing, China, for the sole purpose of documenting a protest turned riot that would eventually turn into the Tiananmen Square massacre. The protest initially started as a funeral for one Hu Yaobang, who was a pro democracy movement advocator within the CCP, or the Communist Chinese Party, which I'll be referring to CCP for the rest of this video. When Yao Bong passed away, the government didn't give him a funeral. His death was premature and suspicious to many, and initially, students from all over the country gathered in the district in order to mourn his loss. What started as a funeral turned into protests for pro democracy and for a change in the government to go from demanding people to live within dense city and urban sprawl into allowing people to make decisions on their own. A more Western ideal which threatened the power structure of the Chinese Communist Party. Jeff Whitner and many other Western journalists arrived in the country in the weeks previous to the riot in order to document it, as many people from across the globe had yet to really see what the internal politics and structure of China looked like. The photo on screen is one of the most infamous photographs from this entire event, called Tank Man. Whitner took this from the sixth floor room in the Beijing Hotel, which was overlooking the Tiananmen Square massacre as it was occurring, and the particular road this photo would be taken on. The photo, which depicts four tanks from the PLA, or People's Liberation Army, going down the road, which is stopped momentarily by a single supposed student wearing a white dress shirt and black slacks. What's striking about this image, beyond the exterior context of these tanks going to the protest to silence them violently, is the striking difference between the four tanks and the one man. Now, obviously, there's definitely a size difference, which I think anybody is plain to see, but what's more shocking and more valuable in the context of the photograph and highlights the intent I believe Whitner was going for was how violent the government was responding in comparison to what it really was. See, the photograph doesn't depict the actual riots themselves as they were unfolding. At the time, the students had turned into a mob that were burning buses and APCs, or armored personnel carriers, that were left in the area. These vehicles had already been evacuated, and to my knowledge, no one was killed by the students or seriously injured. They were simply moved out of the place in the bus's case, or where APCs were abandoned, they were set on fire as a demonstration of anguish. But this photo highlights the disparity in the responses. So the people were few in number compared to the bullets and to the might the Chinese military could bring onto them. People were protesting, they built a statue in the model of the Statue of Liberty, they were singing songs, and they held signs crying for peace, crying for freedom. And the response of the government was to massacre upwards of over 2,000 innocent people who were just there exercising a human right, their right to speech. Jeff Whitner would take this photo and wire it, as the photo had to be confiscated and hidden by a student, which we'll get into in a moment. The photo was wired through telecommunication to the West. The photo would be nominated for a Pulitzer Prize and would grow in popularity along with Jeff Whitner, I should say, after it was featured in a forum on America Online discussing the impact of this photo and highlighting the CCP and governmental tyranny. The forum in general was about influential photos of the time, but looking back, some of the earliest forums you can find discussing this photograph in particular were all about government tyranny against the people, which I think fall in line with Jeff, and we'll get into why here in a second. Now, the equipment Jeff Whitner used, I couldn't find hard facts about. Believe it or not, the photograph was more important to the West and to himself more than the equipment itself. However, what I could find was that Jeff is a fan of Nikon cameras. The first ever camera he purchased was a Nikon he saved up for after working a job at 15 years old, and common cameras used at the time were also Nikon, especially in Tiananmen Square. Most Western journalists who arrived to document the event used a Nikon FE2 camera, which is the camera shown on screen. Jeff most likely used a 400mm 5.6 EDIF lens along with a teleconverter. The reason for this is because other photographers, again, taking similar shots at equally long, if not longer distances, use this lens. It was very popular. You'll see it used or similar lenses to this day. I think my father owns one, actually. And a teleconverter was used in order to take the video, which was Tank Man, as the video initially showed tanks rolling down the road, in order to take photographs of that video as well, to make it easier for transfer. Um, as I've already mentioned, I don't have exact photographs of the equipment, and the equipment itself very, I would argue, didn't influence the taking of the photo itself. What makes the photograph more interesting are the circumstances leading to its photography. See, Tankman was significant not because the equipment he used limited him in any fashion, but more so because the circumstances arising limited him in a significant way. When we think about photographs and how people talk in the news media, we oftentimes can associate some form of controversy with it. And I mean, this isn't new. It's very standard, very common. However, with Whitner, there wasn't much controversy around the photo. There were some conspiracies that this entire event, outside of the massacre, of course, but this instance of a man in white and black standing in front of the tanks was set up by the government, and that was meant to be a sham, almost. I can't find any credible evidence proving this. No one knows. The person in the photo was never identified in any fashion. But what I can confirm is the controversy around Whitner's presence there at all. See, as I've already mentioned, the CCP and PLA were very violently cracking down on the population in the area, and as you would assume, weren't exactly keen to have the West publicize this. After all, the CCP, to this day even, take pride in the fact that the West view them with some level of irreverence. They're the production capital of the world. They export the most resources. They're seen as an independent, strong nation that is very tight knit in their community. They produce successful people because they are successful. Their government's successful, and that's because they are a communist, centralized party. However, this entire event, especially with Western journalists coming to document it, threw everything into question. And the CCP made it a strong effort to make sure that no one could ever hear about this. To this day, you will hardly find anyone from China being able to talk about this event because there's been such hard censorship. Even as this event was occurring, there was an active attempt to censor it and to make sure it couldn't get to the West, which comes back to Whitner and other photographers. See, well, in the West, they were praised. A Pulitzer Prize was nominated for him. He gained a large traction, became so successful that to this day, he has his own website, which I personally recommend checking out. It's called um, jeffwhitner.com. What's interesting is how the Chinese government responded to all this. See, the Chinese government, in the moment, made an active attempt to silence the journalists. I've asked my parents, who lived during the 1980s, I think they were adolescents. They were certainly young teenagers, if not young adults in the 80s, especially 89. They remember hearing on the news that journalists were being held hostage in China and that the West needed to negotiate to have them released. And this was no different. Jeff, as I mentioned, was on the sixth floor of the Beijing hotel. But what's interesting is why he was there. See, why not take the photo on the ground level? Well, that's because he was scared for his life. Jeff was worried, I think reasonably so, that if he was seen on ground level taking this photograph, he would be in danger. Many other photographers have been detained, and there were reports of abuse from the CCP and PLA. Now, I don't know if these are credible or not. I wasn't there. But what I can say is I don't blame anyone for believing these claims. After all, they killed thousands of their own people. This was on TV, it was photographed. We're even looking at a photograph right now of four massive weapons of war coming to either strong arm the people through fear or to give them something to really be afraid of. So Jeff, wanting to document this event from a bird's eye view, was smuggled into the sixth floor of the Beijing hotel, into a hotel room with a Chinese national and a assistant of sorts who came from the States. They took this photograph, and the Western student that had come with him smuggled it in his underwear, I believe, and they transferred the photos through telephone lines in order for Jeff to get a hold of them. If you don't believe me when it comes to fear, Jeff was counted as saying in a CNN interview a few years ago as, quote, there was always a huge risk of being arrested and having film confiscated. He goes on to explain in that same interview that he had been hit in the head by a brick or a rock at some point, and when he went to this room to photograph it, he was already sick, he was bleeding from the head, and he was afraid that the situation was going to escalate further and he was going to be put more at risk. Which, again, I can't blame him. The very reason this photo became historically significant then is the very fact that it not only documents a horrible moment in history, but also serves to remind us that not only is the CCP dangerous on its own, especially to its own people, but it also reminds us how hard they work to cover up events that make them look bad, that remind people of how they are not infallible. But what I find interesting the most is how consistent Widner is in how he photographs this entire event. On screen here are two more photos of the Tiananmen Square revolt. The top left photo, whose name I can't remember, was also taken by Widner. And this is actually just down the road of where he was. This photo was also taken in the Beijing hotel, and it shows a large stockpile and procurement of tanks, armored trucks, and trucks with rockets on them, or sorry, artillery trucks, which you can see in the very back, all sitting and waiting to be used against the people of Tiananmen Square in revolt. While in the bottom right corner, the photo being called APC on Fire is a ground level shot of the crowd trying to burn a pile of garbage and an armored personnel carrier that was abandoned hours ago. What I find consistent, especially when compared to the rest of Widner's library and catalog of photos on his website, is how he chooses to photograph government response versus the people's response. See, in the photos of the government, the CCP and PLA, you'll always notice that they're taken from a distance, always pulled back, always as if they're detached, a bird's eye view. You can imagine Widner sitting in the hotel, arms resting on the balcony, camera in his hands, resting on the rail, trying to get a steady and clear shot. You can feel how he's trying to stalk them, right? It's from a distance. Whereas with the people, he's on the ground with them. He's amongst them. He's not in any harm's way. People are letting him photograph what they're doing. It feels like a stark difference between being afraid to be near them versus being amongst them and being comfortable enough to photograph what is very clearly some form of a violent response against the government and their actions. And this is consistent with the rest of Widner's catalog. Any photograph he takes of the government's response to actions throughout the Tiananmen Square revolts, there's always a pullback. It's always distant, separated. Almost like he's in secret taking these photographs, which he kind of was. Again, he had to hide because he knew the risks of taking these photos, that he could be beaten and he could have everything taken from him. So you'll see several photographs if you Google Tiananmen Square, Jeff Widner, and his catalog. He took photos of trucks filled with soldiers with guns, pointing them at some cases at people walking down the street, not even associated with the protests, just on their way to work or home from school. They were aiming guns at them. This photo was taken from a distance. He takes photos of a man trying to pry a woman away from a PLA member while also trying to assault the man. This is taken on ground level. He's amongst the crowd. He takes a photo of more tanks. He's pulled back. Through his photography, he is telling a story without saying any words that he was afraid of being near the government, that they were a threat, and thus he needed to be far away from them. The shots are so far, you can get a clear view of what they're doing, and it helps to explain to the viewer, again, with as little words as possible, if any, the level of danger these people were in. Whereas when he's with the people themselves, he's on the ground, he's close to the subject, and the viewer can feel immersed as he was. They can picture and try to imagine why they were in this precarious situation. They can understand, to an extent, why they would feel so pressured into doing what they did. I think, to reiterate myself, I truly think that the purpose of these photos was to highlight the danger of the CCP and to make the viewers of the West sympathize with the people they may not have understood. After all, it's the 1980s. We were in a Cold War. The communists were the enemy, the Red Scare, better dead than red. Yet these photographs help to make clear the difference between the communist and the people. See, the government is depicted, truthfully, in my opinion, as dangerous. Their people want freedom. They want the right to vote, the right to be out of the city in the sprawl that Mao Zedong demanded of them. They're shot. But the people, they're revolting. They don't want this. In a time period where people were depicted as their government, being as evil as their government or being cowards for not standing up to their government, these photographs went a long way in showing the West that this isn't true. You know, we may be enemies with the communists, but that doesn't mean the people are the enemies. They're just people. They're dissatisfied like you and I might be. So dissatisfied, they were willing to die for it. And again, I think these photographs do an amazing job of selling that idea. Whenever I see this photo, you can find it online, like I usually do, on online forums discussing government overreach or tyrannical government action. They're used as memes. Video games come out where you're fighting an evil government or an evil faction of fascists, and eventually this photo springs up in one way or another to be a visual shorthand of that governmental action they're describing. And I think to some extent, this is what Widner intended. This photo has cemented itself as a visual reminder of government overreach, as well as serving as a reminder of how we as people, as citizens of any country, are all united under one banner of wanting better for ourselves. No matter which end of the political spectrum you fall under, I guarantee there has been some point where you were dissatisfied with what your government was doing for you. Whether you're in the UK, you're in Europe, South America, or in the United States of America. There has always been some point where you are dissatisfied, and this photograph serves the purpose of both highlighting government power, tyrannical response, and the murder and the capacity to murder of the government, as let's not forget, these tanks were used to kill people, potentially thousands. The death count's never been released, but there was a massacre that day in Tiananmen Square. It's used to show that, while also reminding us that at the end of the day, we're all like that man on the end of the tanks. One person or a small group of people standing up to it, no matter what country you hail from. We are all united under that same fear of what the government or what some other powerful entity can do to us. And I truly believe Widner would be proud would he comment on how we use the photo. And I truly believe that's how it's utilized. But there is one more thing about this photo that I find interesting, and it's one of the main reasons why I want to talk about this. And that's because it's a very dark contrast to how people think of the 1980s, even politically. Because this photo is horrifying. I can say as much as I want to give it some level of irreverence, as I just did, talking about what it represents and how, this photo highlights how we're all unified. But let's face it, this is a horrifying image to see. No one wants to be on the receiving end of these tanks or these guns, especially when you have no way to defend yourself. But this flies in the face of the entire perception of the 1980s. Again, this was 1989, and sure, that's the tail end of the 80s. The next year, it would be the 1990s. But it's still horrifying. And it's still contrasted with photos taken from that same year or a year prior. Don't believe me? These are two photographs taken from the same decade. The one in the bottom left corner coming from around that same year or the year prior, the one above it in the top right corner coming from several years prior. And look at the contrast in these photos. You might not be able to express why you feel this way, but if you're anything like me, you definitely feel safer in these photos. The bottom left photo was taken in 1989. Ronald Reagan visited Berlin, and this was the famous speech where Ronald Reagan said, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." And you'll notice that in the photo, there is almost no tension present. Despite the blue and gray colors, which are present in the suits, the sky, the wall behind them, everything feels a lot calmer, significantly calmer. The blues really sell the idea of this is tranquil. Couple that with the fact that everyone is smiling, apart from the fella in the back with the glasses, and everyone's clapping. It feels like this is a photograph showing a win. A moment where people were proud, where they were happy, and they were. People were happy, people were cheering. But that's divorced of the actual event. The Berlin Wall had been a long contentious point in history. In the 1980s, it served as a stark reminder of the physical and metaphorical divide between the West and East. Winston Churchill called this the Iron Curtain. The Berlin Wall was so contentious, in fact, that um, Truman had to fly planes into West Berlin, which had been cut off from the rest of the country. Because, mind you, Berlin was deep in communist controlled Germany, not Western controlled Germany, and the city itself was also divided between West and East. Supplies had to be flown in just to feed the populace, because the Communist Party was willing to starve its people out. During the Kennedy administration, tanks rolled up at the Berlin Wall from both sides, and this almost caused what could have been the Third World War and the final war, because at this point, both sides had nukes, and they were itching to use them. But none of that is here. You feel none of that tension. You look at this photo, and your first thought isn't at all the dance closer to midnight. You don't think about it, because it's calm. It's tranquil. Everyone's happy. You're so close to Ronald Reagan, you can almost reach out and shake his hand. Give him a high five for that good speech he gave. Clearly, he's happy about it, and the people around him seem pretty jazzed as well. Or the photo in the top right corner. This was a big march to make aware AIDS, to make people aware of AIDS. AIDS is a horrible illness that has killed thousands of people and primarily affected, at least at that time, homosexuals. It is devastating, it's sad, it took plenty of people too soon. And this march was to make people aware of what was happening. Now, much like Tiananmen Square, this was a protest of sorts. Now, while Tiananmen Square eventually erupted into riots, this could have, if it was responded to the same way that Tiananmen Square was. It started as a protest, the police showed up, it then turned into a riot. Protests and mourning first, the government cracks down, now people are angry. But in this photo, people are so calm, they're taking a nap on Capitol Hill. Imagine that. Imagine being able to protest something or to make a political statement and feeling so calm and safe about it that you not only wear a shirt about it, you show up in a large crowd, but you get so tired you think, hey, you know what? Let's just nap on the lawn. That's a good idea. I'm tired. We can talk about this 20 minutes. I need my rest. And the photographer is there with them, again, on the ground in the crowd. It's almost like you can imagine the photographer wading through the sleeping people, getting this really well shot photo showing the Capitol Hill in the back to really remind people how far they've come and to remind them that they're not just protesting in a park, they're protesting in DC. And once that photo's taken, given where everyone is at, you can almost imagine the photographer feeling safe enough to maybe put his bag down and take a rest too. It's amazing. Both these photos, despite serious subject matter, especially in the case of the Berlin Wall, given the global tension, They feel comforting. They feel safe. You don't think that there's something wrong. You don't think anyone's in harm. You're thinking the photographer was there for a photo op, or the photographer was there to show history and just so happened to capture a peaceful moment. But you couldn't possibly imagine that for this, could you? It's too bright. It's horrifying. The subject matter, even devoid of exterior context, just seeing this is horrifying. What could this one man possibly do to deserve this response? The sun is so overbearing. It's like the sun itself is bleaching the image. It's harsh. Even the black and white photo or the photo with the dark blues that makes it feel like an overcast sky, they feel calm. But this, there's no possible way to relax. It hurts your eyes to stare at. You feel scared. You think, even if I was a photographer and I was far away, what if someone notices me? What if a PLA member saw me and is coming to get me now? You feel paranoid like Widner must have been. And you start to really feel the fear that everyone must have felt in that moment. And that's why I chose this photograph. There were plenty of uplifting photos to take in the 1980s or any time period really. But this photo has always stuck with me because every time I see it, I get a sinking feeling in my stomach. And all I could think is, when does the next shoe drop? At what point does a protest turn into a massacre? And I think to myself, I sure do hope it never turns out like this. Because even if you know nothing about Tiananmen Square, just seeing this image, you know something is wrong because you're a human. And you know this should never be the way anybody responds to their people. This photo has been used to spread awareness of government tyranny, to mock government tyranny, and to bring sympathy to people who may not understand a foreign land. Because even if you don't know the Chinese language or their culture, their religion, their holidays, their food, there's one thing you understand, and that's that they're people too. And I would hope that you would never wish this upon anybody. And I think that's the real brilliance of Jeff Widner capturing this moment. I don't think any other photographer could have done it as well as he. And that's why this photo is so personally and historically significant.